Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni, and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective. Good morning, Rob. How are you doing?
Mate, I'm exceptionally well. How are you?
Yeah, really well, mate. Really well.
It's all right. I'm excited about our guest today.
It's a great guest, one of your friends from your time and travels in Palestine. David Sheen, who's an investigative journalist and filmmaker, is joining us from Haifa. Good morning, mate.
Hey, how you doing? It's just afternoon here, but getting into a smooth afternoon. It's kind of hazy outside, but nice and bright still. I'm looking out at the Mediterranean from my perch here in Haifa.
Well, it's freezing here, so you...
It's going to be 1 degree tonight. Thanks very much.
Oh, goodness. My sympathies.
David, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Okay, sure. I don't like to talk too much about myself because as far as I'm concerned, it's the stories I'm reporting on that are the stories, not the storyteller. But just as for some people, it helps to understand the context I'm coming from. So I've been working as a journalist here in 48 territories in Israel for the last decade plus. I've been living here since 1999. And I was born in Canada. That's where I spent the first 25 years. That's what accounts for the English, or most of the accent. And exactly. Like I said, I've been working as a journalist for the last 12 years or so. But even beforehand, I had come to the country many times, and I had been living here for some time. I was a citizen from birth. My father was born here, and his parents were born here. So though I grew up in Canada, I came a lot as a child. As a teenager, visiting family, friends, and traveling around the country in the context of Zionist trips to Israel. I come from a Jewish family. I don't worship Yahweh, but that's, but I'm Jewish. So in any case, having that experience of the country for the first 25 years of basically experiencing the country through other people's experiences, when I moved here, I moved to Tel Aviv in 1999, I began for the first time experiencing the country directly myself, just as I went about the course of the day, finding a place to live, finding a place to work, going to work, and back and forth. And just encountering folks, I began to have experiences that made me question and quickly change my political understandings of the place. As I came to realize that much of what I'd been told was not true, was distorting the truth. So, of course, it still took some years. I still had a lot to learn, to catch up on. But that was my first break really within like a month of moving to the country. I started out PEP standing for Progressive Except for Palestine. So it's not that I was on the right side of the political map in on every other way. I was on the left side of the political map in every other way, except for my politics on this place. So that was based on wrong information. Once I had right information or direct my own perceptions, from my perspective, it's right. But, once I perceived it myself, that's when I started shifting my position on what I would like to see happen here. And
was there an epiphanous moment? Was there a trigger, one thing that set you off?
I think that one of the things that I go back to was meeting some folks who were building the apartment building I was living in. They were doing construction, they were doing renovations. And I had come from Canada and I was pretty polite. So I would just say hello as I entered and exited the building to the men who were working on the building. Good morning, how's it going? What's up? After several days of this, then, what's up, how's it going? Came to, oh, we're having a cigarette. You want to sit down and have a cigarette? So you share a cigarette. And then maybe after a few days, they're like, oh, sit down, we're having coffee. You want to join us for coffee? And after a few days, it was just like, oh, here, we're just having some hummus. Do you want some? So I began to have just a casual acquaintanceship with these men working on my house. And then casually, over the course of our conversations, I understood that they were from Nablus and that it took them hours to get to work every morning. Like they would have to wake up at 4 a.m. or something ridiculous like that and leave their villages to get to work, so that when I leave for work in the morning, they're already at work. And I realized these men don't present any security threat, right? So what's the reason from them having to be so inconvenienced every single day? And it wasn't like it was like an especially tense time with lots of attacks that only, you know what I mean? The security measures ratcheted up, and that was just the norm. And I realized, okay, well, to me, it's obvious. It's to keep a captive labor force that you can, exploit at your will. So once I realized that, one aspect of the occupation is economic, that it was an economic injustice to people, I was just like, what? It came up against my socialist values. Once I realized that the security reason didn't account, that was just the excuse that was given, wow, then the moral argument won over. And so that was, I guess, the epiphany, so-called. Of course, there are other experiences, but that's the one that sticks out in my mind, yeah. But just really a personal experience, a human experience. I mean, I met Arab people, Muslim people growing up in Toronto, but never really knew any Palestinians well. So just, it's a multicultural city, but it just didn't happen. So then I guess coming here and actually meeting Palestinians and getting to know some, even that was enough to make me realize that my education or brainwashing had brought me to somewhere that I wasn't going to stay. Yeah. So that's the story in a bit.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that, David, because Peter Beinart, as you know, one of Zionist royalty out of New York, he wrote an article recently talking about his transformation from, very Zionist household, et cetera, all the Arabs want to kill us, drive us into the sea, to where he is today as a one-stater. And he was saying the point that was most transformative for him was actually speaking to a Palestinian and breaking down all the stereotypes that had been fed to him for his entire life. I'm interested, David, you're talking about that captive labour market. I mean, the reality, the disparity between the GDP per person between a Palestinian, let's say 67 East Jerusalem Gazan, and a 48 Jewish person is a factor of 10, sort of 50K versus 5K. Wow. You spoke about that, keeping a captive labor force. And a couple of months ago when we had the latest massacre in Gaza, when the Palestinians had a general strike all over historic Palestine, it was a significant pain on the Israeli economy.
I don't spend much of my time actually in the West Bank. I leave that to other journalists who are based in the West Bank and who speak Arabic, so they're better qualified to report on the stories of Palestinians living there. But, from my perch here, observing Jewish-Israeli society, in the last few months, you've heard that we had national elections here. And finally, after much struggle, Benjamin Netanyahu was ousted as the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history. So the party that he leads, the Likud party that ruled Israel for much of the last several decades, of course, Netanyahu is still the leader of that party, but there's murmurings. There's the idea that if he brought them to defeat, that they need a new leader after all these years. And the prime candidate who is being propped up by right-wing groups to replace Netanyahu as the leader of the Likud party is Nir Barkat, who is the previous mayor of Jerusalem. What's interesting was just to get a sense of where Israel is on this. So here's the candidate basically to be potentially the next leader of the opposition and leader of the country. He released a video a couple months ago where he was, as a minister in charge of the economy, or he has to present what his economic plan is. And in explaining his plan, he's saying that we need to, drive investment in the West Bank. And one of the ways he pitched this was, he said, and it's a cheap labor force. Like he explicitly, straight up. And I mean, we were just, when stuff like this happens, we're just tripping, like, oh my gosh, you admit it, but of course, in the context with which he says it, no one blinks even because it's normalized. But in any case, yes, that's a normalized part of the discourse, that the Palestinian people are a cheap labor force. And so that's, in my opinion, one of the strong reasons why the occupation lasts decades and decades is because it's convenient economically for Israeli citizens.
You said that Benjamin Netanyahu's reign as the longest-serving prime minister has ended. I know I certainly saw Biden welcome President Rivlin into the White House, and they were laughing and giggling about the death of Netanyahu. In Australia, they're talking about what new opportunities exist with Naftali Bennett. Now, we know better. Naftali Bennett is to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu. I've killed a lot of Arabs and I don't have a problem with that, Naftali Bennett.
He's no leftist. Let's put it that way. Yeah. I mean, so this is the discourse in Australia? Is this the discourse that he's some kind of...
The reality is that as a white settler colonialist country where, I've got so much in common with the state of Israel, and in fact, it's seen as a reset, that the obstacle to peace has been Netanyahu all along. And now that we've got this sort of obstinate guy out, we've got a new blood in, there's going to be new opportunities.
Oh my goodness. It's so disheartening to hear that that's the narrative that, rational people are embracing, because it couldn't be farther from the truth. As you pointed out, Naftali Bennett is to the right. He even said so in his opening address to the Knesset, that my government will be 5 degrees to the right of Netanyahu, or 10 degrees. I don't remember what degrees he said. He's already, trying to dial it to the right. And that doesn't even account for the fact that even outside the governing coalition, he has the most right-wing Knesset legislature in Israeli history. You've got, once again, full-on terrorists, the Kahanist movement in the Knesset as representatives with parliamentary immunity. It's absolutely ridiculous. The only reason that they finally ousted Netanyahu is not any rejection whatsoever of his, right-wing anti-Palestinian politics. It's only because he's up on corruption charges. He's on trial for major corruption crimes. And the evidence for that has been put out in the Israeli media. It's pretty damning.
It's a bad look.
Evidence
it's a bad look, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, it's because of that, now all the people, his closest circle, several ministers around him are also being charged with corruption crimes. So it's the corruption is so sickening and so ingrained that, he's actually attracted other corruption around him, secondary, tertiary corruption. At this point, the government stopped functioning. So really, that's really the reason. It's saving the Zionist project from the Netanyahu forever project. That's the only reason that we saw a change in government. Yeah.
Tell us about Naftali Bennett. I know that I watched some of your videos from many years ago, and I couldn't believe what you were saying, that they were saying, statements. What else has he said? Because he is a vile human being, isn't he? Tell us about him just briefly.
Look, I don't think he's the worst, but he's certainly the head of the eliminationist camp in Israel. And what that means is that he's the head of the camp that wants to ethnically cleanse the country of non-Jews, the religious parties in the country. That's their end game. And of course, loosely saying that, of course, there are, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox people who don't want that. But I'm talking now of the bulk of that, and it's borne out in statistics after statistics after statistics, that the second largest camp in the country, after the apartheid camp, after the dominationist camp, the second biggest political camp in the state of Israel is the eliminationist camp. And that camp is headed by Naftali Bennett. And that's why he's prime minister, because they needed one member of that eliminationist camp to be considered legitimate in the eyes of the people. Their camp is the second biggest. So you have to have at least one faction of that camp in the government for it to be seen by the people, the Israeli electorate, as legitimate. So the other eliminationist parties are in the opposition now with Netanyahu. But Naftali Bennett was needed, and that's why, even though he only has 6 seats, 5% of the parliament, that's nothing, but that's why he was made prime minister, because the votes of the eliminationist camp were crucial. Of course, they tried to rely as little as possible on the Palestinian parties, but they need the eliminationist parties. So he on his own, we can look during the last war, let's say the last bombardment of Gaza in 2014, I'm talking now. At that time, Naftali Bennett went on television and said in English, described what was going on as Hamas committing self-genocide. Okay, so it means that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, but the people who are at fault, who are to blame for it, are Hamas. But there's no dispute that what's happening is a genocide. So that gives you, a sense of who he is. He does try to, give lip service to democracy, but I can also give you a long list of quotes that show the exact opposite. But he grew up some years in the US on the West Coast. So he, like Netanyahu, speaks English. When the two of them, would meet to discuss arrangements, they speak in English to each other, as they both grew up in the United States, spent those pivotal teen years in the US. So, but again, like Netanyahu, he's slick in front of the camera. He can speak English well and tell, weave a tale, but ultimately he's the head of. Yeah, that's what makes him dangerous. Yeah,
I've never heard those terms before, David. Thank you for giving us a domination party and elimination. So Yair Lapid, who's the alternative prime minister, he's from the domination party.
That's right. He's in the domination camp. Right.
His camp, we talk about the Knesset's got 120 seats. They're at 61 or 60.
Right. They have to have at least 61.
And they've actually got the Islamist Palestinian Party. I don't know how they're going to get re-elected. But anyway, so most recently, Naftali Bennett had a shock loss. His first piece of legislation was to renew the family reunification law, which denies Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel from the opportunity to marry spouses that aren't 48ers and give them citizenship. And that's been rolling along. So out of the 120 seats, they had 59-59. So Netanyahu lobbied against it to prove that this is not really a right-wing party.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very cynical move. Of course, he wants this. He pushed it all those years while he was prime minister for this law to be renewed every year because he wants as few Palestinians in the country. He's long said so, over decades. So there's no shock that he opposes or that he supports the law in principle. It's just that he's the leader of the opposition now. He thinks he can still get back into the prime minister's seat. He doesn't think he's ousted. He hasn't gone nowhere, right? He's still fighting every day in the Knesset to topple the government. And there's a not small likelihood that could happen. There's lots of reasons why, as with a coalition that's so fragile and so brittle, that it's very possible that for a whole host of reasons it could break up any time. And then, Netanyahu would be perfectly positioned to return to the prime minister's office. So it's a cynical move on his part, but he's not exactly known for his moral upstanding or anything.
David, what do you think the chances of that happening are?
I try not to make predictions when I don't have a sense of it, because all this stuff is going on behind the scenes, but there's no way that government is gonna last 4 years. And I highly doubt that it will last 2 years, which is when Yair Lapid thinks that he's going to take over from Bennett as prime minister. There's a million reasons. Now keep in mind that the idea now of this government is to return bipartisanship or bipartisan support for Israel in the American Congress. This is why we have the same group of advisors advising both U.S. President Biden and or the ones who are in the Democratic majority for Israel, a lobby group lobbying Biden from inside so-called the Democratic Party to support Israeli intransigence. And so then you have on this side of the pond the same Democratic majority for Israel so-called lobby group advising Yair Lapid about political situation here in Israel. So the same group of advisors, this is what they want to see. They want to see that in what Israel lost in recent years, the idea that the entire American political spectrum pretty much gave wholesale support for every move it made. It lost that in recent years with Netanyahu dry humping Trump's leg and basically completely becoming like open, outspoken advocate of like the PAC's far right that it includes Trump and Netanyahu and various European countries, and the idea here is there's no need to be diplomatic anymore. We can just like openly just say we're right wing and you left wingers are traitors, and it's on both sides of the Atlantic, and this is who we are, and this is the right way, and we're going to have a right wing majority forever. So obviously that causes some consternation back in the U.S. for Israel's supporters who use the Democratic Party as their vehicle to push pro-Zionist policies. So they need someone like Yair Lapid. They need someone like Biden in the White House and Lapid here on this side of the pond to put a so-called kinder face on Israel. And that's what we're going to see. We're not going to see, what we had during the Trump era, where he was actually putting Kahanist supporters in charge of U.S. public policy on Israel, where the Kahanists actually, ran U.S. public policy. So, he's not going to do that. And on this side, they're going to have, Yair Lapid repeat platitudes and make people, with his gelled hair and his, perfect teeth, he's going to say, don't worry, we're back. Just like, Biden says, okay, Trump's gone, we're back. So it's the same thing here. Lapid's going to say, Netanyahu's gone, we're back. So you can, keep the money and political support, rolling in, and it's all to the good. You can go back to sleep and not be concerned about what's happening here. Just go back.
Nothing to see.
Default. Yeah, nothing to see here. Exactly. No war crimes to see here. It looks like that's going to have the next little while. So what are you thinking?
The reality of this family reunification law is that, it's an extension of the nation state law in expressing explicitly the apartheid nature of the country. Yair Lapid tweeted, "There's no need for us to hide from the purpose of this law. It's one of the tools meant to secure a Jewish majority in Israel. Israel is a nation state of Jewish people, and our goal is that it will always have a Jewish majority." Aside from Human Rights Watch, their report earlier this year, B'Tselem's report, on top of all of the reports from all the Palestinians along the journey, even two former Israeli ambassadors to South Africa have come out and said it's apartheid. We have to be getting closer to that point where Israel's so on the nose that people start holding it to account, surely.
I can't speak for how many people are going to hold their nose and for how long and how, when we can expect that. To me, it's, look, you talked about Yair Lapid openly expressing support for the law and explaining the racist nature of it. Like the explicit reason was to maintain a Jewish majority. Well, this is why I describe them as dominationists, because their vision is to have one state in which one ethnic group dominates the other. That is the largest political bloc in Israel. That's like 60 to 65% of the votes. Then you add the eliminationists, that's another 20 or so percent. You're looking at 85% of the electorate want either domination or elimination. So one state, either one dominated by apartheid or the non-Jews ethnically cleansed. So of course, if everyone living in the land from the river to the sea were counted and enfranchised and had a vote, that's about 50% of the population would be Jewish, 50% Palestinian. So they could, even if we had the same voting patterns, and I doubt we would, but even if we did, that domination and eliminationists would not have such a huge chunk. But because Palestinian voices are disenfranchised, they don't vote for the Knesset, so we don't have that. I don't think that here, that on the Jewish side there are, I described it maybe 15, like 15% of the electorate, but that votes not for one of those domination or eliminationist parties, but many of those votes are from Palestinian citizens of Israel. Of the Jewish citizens of Israel, the amount that supports a two-state solution or a one equal state, one democratic state, we're talking about a very small percentage of the population. So within the society, Israel obviously militarily can't be bested. It's got such a super strong army, one of the strongest in the world, one of the most powerful, arms, weapons manufacturing countries in the world. So there's no chance of Israel being defeated militarily. And there's no chance seemingly from within Israeli society for a group of liberals or socialists to, working with Palestinian citizens of Israel to kind of roll back the apartheid and bring about a one-state reality in which everyone's equal, or a two-state situation where there's two separate states. Meaning like a realistic one, not Bantustans, of course. That it's not going to come from besting Israel militarily. It's not going to come from within the Israeli society. So it has to, at least in part, come from pressure from outside. Now, how does world opinion come to change one way or another? Is it from reports put out by Israeli groups? Is it reports put out by Palestinian groups? I do think that okay, great. They've said the word apartheid, and I'm not a political advisor. Maybe that's what, getting people to accept a word, a specific word, a concept, a phrase. Maybe that is what's necessary. But my personal piece in this is that instead of trying to get people to come to a consensus around a particular framework, this is decolonization, and okay, great, we have that framework, but and some people spend their time trying to convince people to understand and adopt that framework. But my role, as I see it, is showing more about what's actually happening on the ground, because my belief is that the more, just like I had a different belief about this place when I didn't have the facts, but other people too would be like this, and that if they only knew more facts, then they would also come around to a different way of seeing things. And for working here as a journalist from all these years, I know that there are so many stories that, despite the fact that there are zillions of journalists working here, foreign, local, but still, those are really hamstrung. Most of the local journalists here are working for the dominationist or eliminationist media. And the ones who are foreign journalists, obviously they're hamstrung because they need their credentials authorized by the Israeli government just to be here in the country. So, they have to be conscious of reporting a certain political line as well. What it means is that so many stories just simply don't get told. There's no practical way. There's no one that's going to publish it. There's no one going to pay for it. There's no one's going to research it. My piece has been working on stories that everyone else missed, either because they're too close, or they're too far, or they're, just their political opinions prevent them from realizing its importance. And so that's what I've been kind of doing here, hacking away, and in my own little, niche, exposing some pretty scandalous stories that the mainstream media completely, blipped on, whether it's,
How can our listeners get all of these stories? What's your website that they can gain access to all of this?
Sure. Well, my website is just my name, davidsheen.com. So that's DavidSheen.com. There you'll see a list to, let's say my last 100 articles, links to all the articles. You can read them. There's links to dozens and dozens of lectures on university campuses around the world. And some of these are filmed. I often, bring graphic elements into them. There's slideshows. These slideshows, based on my reporting, are helpful kind of multimedia vehicles for kind of understanding what's going on here. So there's lots of different formats, if it's writing or video or slideshows. I encourage people, and of course I use social media to, if you're a social media user, you're welcome to check me out, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatnot, and it's all linked to from the davidsheen.com.
Yeah, and people should share your work, because that's what needs to happen. It's like you're saying, people need to see what's happening on the ground, and if people can't go there, at least they can read from stories from those that have been there. It's easy to empathize, with these people.
David, we've got about a minute to go, so it's davidsheen.com. We'll put that link in the podcast. What do you think needs to happen?
I want there to be complete equality here. I want everyone living in the land to have equal rights, and I want a free immigration policy so that people can move here, of course, including refugees who were forced and not allowed to return. I would like, and in general, an open immigration policy to people who want to come here. So that's just my bias. But will that happen in my lifetime? I don't know. But it's up to me to continue doing this work. It's up to you to support this work, and you can do with PayPal, Patreon, or whatnot. But definitely start by checking out davidsheen.com and getting updates from the ground.
Fantastic, David. Thanks so very much for sharing this morning with us. Wishing you the very best. And remember, listeners, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.